I remember the days when Slender Man was possibly the most popular horror figure on the internet. Originating from a forum contest to see who could create the best urban legend Photoshop, Slender Man is a tall, thin, faceless man in a suit with multiple tendril-like appendages, who is associated with appearing in the backgrounds of photographs and kidnapping children. Ever since that forum post, his popularity spread around the internet, with many folks creating online stories, creepypastas, and series dedicated to him. But gradually, the character's popularity began to fade. The main problem, of course, was that Slender Man's strengths lie in how mysterious he is, constantly appearing in the shadows, with so little known about who and what he really is. So, once he'd become so well known, it took away a lot of the mystique behind the character, which kind of goes against the whole point. And then in 2014, there was a tragic case in which two 12-year-old girls attempted to murder their friend by luring her out into the woods and stabbing her repeatedly, claiming they did it to appease Slender Man. Keep this in mind because it is going to be relevant later. By 2018, Slender Man's popularity had mostly died down, and yet someone had the bright idea to make a movie about him. And having now seen it, honestly, this has to be one of the most boring horror movies I have ever seen in my life. But nonetheless, it has given me a fair bit to talk about, so let's talk about it. What went wrong with Slender Man? The movie starts off by introducing us to a painfully one-dimensional group of teenage girls. The four of them are not interesting and are virtually interchangeable. They don't even have the most basic character traits to differentiate them from one another, like the smart one, or the quirky one, or the goth. Anyways, these girls are having a party of sorts when one of them brings up the fact that a group of boys they know are supposedly getting together that same night to summon Slender Man. She explains who Slender Man is by opening up her laptop, reading some basic information, and finding a video on how to summon him. Yeah, this is our introduction to Slender Man, just a vague online description and a bunch of girls choosing to summon him because they have nothing better to do. They watch the video, then each have nightmares about it, despite it not being particularly terrifying. Then, sometime in the future, as they're having a class field trip, one of the girls, Katie, wanders off into the woods and goes missing. The three friends try to investigate and find out that Katie has been obsessing over Slender Man, researching him online and talking to other victims of his. One of the girls gets the idea to try to summon him again through some other random method involving going out into the woods at night, destroying some loved possessions, blindfolding themselves, and waiting for him to arrive. But the girl named Chloe decides to take the blindfold off, sees his face, and starts losing her mind. The two remaining girls argue over what to do as one of them, Ren, begins to obsess over Slender Man and how to appease him, while the other girl, Hallie, seems to not care a great deal. So Ren decides to try to sacrifice Hallie's sister to Slender Man in order to get the others back, which leaves Hallie with no choice other than to give herself over to the monster in exchange for her sister. So, what's wrong with this movie? Well, it commits one of the worst sins a movie can possibly commit. It's just so damn boring. The film isn't scary, the atmosphere just doesn't work, and then there's the characters. Yeah, one of the reasons the film is so boring is likely because the characters are so boring. They aren't likeable, they don't stand out in the least, and there's just nothing to them. Hallie in particular is wholly unpleasant to watch. When Katie first goes missing, Hallie's reaction can be best summed up as just nonchalant boredom. Despite one friend being missing, another losing her mind, and the third completely obsessing over Slender Man, her response is more or less to shrug and go, "Whatever, I'm gonna go on a date with some guy instead." Much like how I Know Who Killed Me felt like Baby's first art movie, Slender Man very much feels like Baby's first horror movie. There's just such a lack of subtlety here. It's chock full of pointless jump scares, fake out jump scares, pointless generic creepy footage that isn't scary without any context, and some of the visuals are laughably bad. There's a scene where Hallie is making out with her new date when she starts to hallucinate his face shaking and distorting rapidly, but the effect is so over the top and cheap looking that it comes across like a parody of bad Slender Man videos. And this is far from the only moment that attempts to be scary yet comes across as unintentional comedy. The sheer lack of subtlety really needs to be addressed too though. The scene where Chloe takes off her blindfold, then gets caught by Slender Man and starts acting weird is a good example of this. In a well-made movie, Chloe would have disappeared, her friends would have frantically chased after her, but then she would just randomly reappear acting kind of weird. That way, it's up to the audience's imagination to figure out what happened to her. Sometimes not knowing what happened can be scarier. Instead, we see her run into Slender Man, and when she returns, her friends immediately figure out that clearly she got caught by him. Wow, mystery solved. Not a single drop of ambiguity, you just showed us exactly what happened. Not helping is the fact that Slender Man himself doesn't really come across as that threatening. Like I said at the beginning, Slender Man's appeal comes from how he's always a mysterious figure in the shadows and the background. So the fact that this movie keeps putting him front and center is taking away from that. Not to mention that the visuals aren't especially convincing. On top of that, we barely see him do anything. All he does at first is make the characters hallucinate a bit. Then he starts assaulting the characters, except not really, because it was just a hallucination again. Eventually, we see exactly what he does to the victims he kidnaps by showing him turning into a tree and absorbing Hallie, turning her into the tree too, or something. Why? Is this a known power of his? Is this a reference to Dante's Inferno? Is Slender Man just an extreme environmentalist? And, okay, we have to talk about the similarities to the Slender Man stabbings. There's a scene in the trailer where one of the girls stabs herself in the eye while being possessed by Slender Man. This scene was heavily criticised for being too reminiscent of the tragedy that occurred in 2014, and thus it was removed from the final product. And it's theorised that many other scenes may have been cut for the same reason. I think it's possible that this movie was going to be a lot gorier, but any scenes with serious violence were removed, leaving the movie just a pathetic, toothless mess that isn't scary in the least. Don't get me wrong, even if the gory scenes had been kept and had been legitimately disturbing, it probably wouldn't have made up for just how boring and stupid the story and characters are. The thing is, this movie was released 4 years after the stabbing incident. It wasn't like they hit some unfortunate, unpredictable controversy while filming. They could have quite easily written a different movie that wasn't so similar. And quite frankly, I'd argue that the scene where Ren tries to sacrifice Hallie's sister is more insensitive, given that's kind of the exact same scenario as the stabbings. Like, if you're gonna keep that scene in the movie, you'd think they might as well have just kept the eye stabbing scene. Or, rewritten the movie. Or maybe just not written the movie at all. Anyway, if that's what went wrong, how would I put it right? First things first, this should have always been a found footage movie. Slender Man became famous for being a mysterious urban legend. What creeps people out is the so-called realism of the footage he's featured in. So why not take advantage of the realism that comes with found footage productions? On top of that, it'll allow for some great opportunities for Slender Man to just appear in the background of certain shots, rather than be front and centre. Like, you can have whoever's holding the camera just catch him briefly in shot, then run away in fear. That's more effective. Have the movie begin with the girls at some kind of outdoor campfire party, filming themselves doing stupid stuff while drunk, when one of them wanders off into the woods. The others drunkenly ignore this, but then a minute or so later a loud scream can be heard from the woods, and they run in to try to find her but get nowhere and quickly shut the camera off. Cue the title, followed by the main girl doing a video diary where she talks about how much she misses her friend, actually coming across as remorseful and sympathetic, before she and the others decide to record themselves searching for their friend, only to come across some strange clues that lead them down the Slender Man rabbit hole. Start off reasonably subtle, with the friends not entirely believing the situation until they really start to see the clues and evidence. And yeah, have one of them disappear then reappear in the woods, but don't show what happens this time. Just show them acting really strange once they return. Leave it to the audience's imagination. And above all else, give the characters personalities and make them likeable. If there's one thing that can truly kill a horror movie, it's making the characters so unlikable that you just flat out don't care what happens to them. And that was evident throughout the entirety of the original movie. Is there a lesson to be learned from this film? Well, first things first, if your film has some connection to a real-life tragedy, actually stop and consider if what you're presenting on screen is too insensitive. But aside from that, if you're making a horror movie adaptation of a particular subject, actually consider what made that subject scary in the first place and take advantage of it. Don't assume that just putting it in your movie will be enough to scare the audiences without considering the importance of atmosphere and subtlety. And of course, when making a horror movie, or indeed any movie, do what you can to avoid those 8 deadly words. Those being, I don't care what happens to these people. And that, my friends, is exactly what went wrong. Thanks for watching the video. What are your thoughts on this movie, and on Slender Man in general? Do you think it was just a bad adaptation of a good character? Or do you think that the Slender Man character has kind of run its course? Whatever your thoughts, let me know down below. Like, share and subscribe and all that jazz, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!